Hello. Today's Thanksgiving Day. I have a wide series of meditations, thoughts, and provocations to share with the wider world and the universe today. I call this Attack of the Massholes Part 1. I've always known about the history of New York and Massachusetts and slavery and the slave trade and the history of slavery in the North because slavery predates democracy. It's an old institution in the Atlantic colonies, and these are the states upon which the present day United States were founded. Today we celebrate our Pilgrim Fathers who landed on Plymouth Rock, who settled one squabble with the Indian when in reality the war continued against them. The settlers expanded, they were fruitful, and they multiplied. The Indians were always had an inferior weapon technology among them, but never as inferior as you would think. They were, at some point, pretty early on, they had guns too. They just were only getting the guns the whites were, the hand-me-down guns that the whites are willing to send them. That money is more valuable to the settlers. And so you have this actual serious cultural significance of slavery to the economy and to the society and to the social controls and norms in the North, because it was just as prevalent as an institution. The only difference is that the number of blacks not being as necessarily high. So slavenorth.com is an excellent historic resource. I've known about it for years. It's a historian in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who has this site, and it's sort of interesting how much the historic contribution of black labor is always consigned to a certain part of American history. Obama was the first president to even mention that the slavery was part of American history too, because even the slaves made America a better place in their era. And no American president has ever mentioned that. And in my opinion, even that was a really bit of an insulting treatment. As someone whose descendants were really not enslaved here at all at any time. It's more of the same consignment. And part of that is this vast historic ignorance that must extend all the way to the ivory tower, I'm certain, of the conditions and the profound penetration that slavery achieved in the northern status quo. So, there are a lot of excerpts I can read from Northern Prophets from Slavery, one of the sub-sites, but it was basically explaining the economic development consequences in Boston and Newport, which were the chief slave ports, and the Rhode Islanders who had started around 1709, the Middle Passage, all this, this happened when the slave market was opened up in 1696. So it was actually, I would guess you would say, an economically progressive move to allow smaller and more local companies access to West African markets. And you see how commodified human beings sound at this point? This is me paraphrasing on my own. This is me using my own Western education to talk about what happened to my ancestors. I'm doing this, not the dude who wrote this. I'm expanding on it. It's that easy to use your mind to analyze things in this disgustingly cold and cruel economic fashion. Especially like me, because as a city planner, I seek to be an apex civil servant. That's what I want. So the rum output was also an important part. You see, when the British in 1763 proposed a tax on sugar and molasses, Massachusetts merchants pointed out that these were the staples of the slave trade, and the loss of that would throw 5,000 seamen out of work in the colony and idle almost 700 entire ships. That's really funny because Obama just hit Romney because Massachusetts was losing jobs when he was governor. And you hear these, these people didn't want to be put out of work in the 1760s either. Massachusetts merchants pointed out that the connection between molasses and the slave trade was rum. Millions of gallons of cheap rum, manufactured in New England, went to Africa and bought black people. Tiny Rhode Island had more than 30 distilleries. This is great because the Basin States, is going to have a high output of rum also, just like West Indian countries now have rum going on because it's a square acre output thing. Like half their output has to be like fucking distilleries. Massachusetts had 63 distilleries, 2.7 million gallons of rum in 1774. Some was for local use. Rum was ubiquitous in lumber camps and on fishing ships. That doesn't sound good. A bunch of Puritan men drinking rum on a ship together. But primarily, rum was linked with the Negro trade, and immense quantities of the raw liquor were sent to Africa in exchange for slaves. So important was rum on the Guinea coast that by 1723 it had surpassed French and Holland brandy, English gin, trinkets, and dry goods as a medium of barter. Slaves costing the equivalent of 4 or 5 pounds in rum, pound sterling, or bar iron in West Africa were sold in the West Indies in 1746 for 30 pounds to 80 pounds. So the West Indies were way richer than Africa, even now. But the Africans were buying and selling people. Obviously. I mean, West African social structures were sophisticated. They involved complex states. Some were more nationalist. Some were more civic. Some were more federative. Some were more radically microscopic. And, you have so many different concepts of humanity, human rights, authority, older concepts, civilizations that are more undisturbed in their ways in many cases, and then also Islamic influenced civilizations as well. Crazy stuff. We can say we empathize that horrifying things have been done by the colonizers in Africa since what they did to our ancestors when our ancestors were sold out of their continent for cheap. For cheap. Not even for much. They embarrassed themselves still by not selling their people for more. And I also say we can't blame today's West Africans for that because we don't know which of them were in our strata that were at that high risk, and we don't know which of them were true benefactors. And we could find out true beneficiaries. My bad. 30 to 80 pounds. New England thrift made the rum cheaply. I've always been saying that I'm so proud this Thanksgiving to have been engaging in Protestant thrift. And it changed my life. And I hope I can make it change yours. Production cost was as low as 5.5 pence a gallon. We wouldn't have that again. And the same spirit of Yankee thrift discovered that slave ships were most economical, with only 3 feet 3 inches of vertical space to a deck and 13 inches of surface area per slave. Fascinating. The human cargo laid in carefully like spoons in a silverware case. A list of the leading slave merchants is almost identical. with the list of the region's prominent families: the Fennays, the Royals, the Cabots of Massachusetts. Wow, Cabot. The Wantons, Browns, and Champlains of Rhode Island, the Whipples of New Hampshire, the Eastons of Connecticut, Willing and Morris of Philadelphia. To this day, it's difficult to find an Old North institution of any antiquity that isn't tainted by slavery. Ezra Stiles imported slaves while president of Yale. 6 slave merchants served as mayor of Philadelphia. Even a liberal bastion like Brown University has the same full blot on its escutcheon. It's named for the Brown brothers, Nicholas, John Joseph, and Moses, manufacturers and traders who shipped salt, lumber, meat, and slaves. And like many business families of the time, the Browns have indirect connections to slavery via rum distilling. John Brown, who paid half the cost of the college's first library, became the first Rhode Islander prosecuted under the Federal Slave Trade Act of 1794, and he had to forfeit his slave ship. Historical evidence also indicates that slaves were used at the family's candle factory in Providence, its ironworks in Scituate, and to build Brown's University Hall. The Ivy League, eh? I'm finally realizing what Stokely Carmichael said, that we are fools to simply assimilate into the society that was given birth from the Puritans and their insane Christian fascism, and actually something that did American exceptionalism is born from this Puritan concept of Boston as a city on a hill. Boston was also the nexus of the northern slave trade and population, and the hey, and and the Puritans, their moral, their attitudes were insane. They were authoritarian. They were like almost like Saudis of their time. But to assimilate into this nascent, this feast from the nascent state of what it was, it's crazy. I'm gonna have a nice meal. I already know about all the slaughtered Indians. That part everyone knows about. But this is also how they used the land and used the trade in human beings and industrial production of vice to manipulate a whole global order, an order. And we are consigning ourselves to live within the order because we want it. We are in love with this new order. That Obama's in love with it too. Everybody wants us to think that you can make it in America, but America was made on this. So on this Thanksgiving Day, I want you to really question everything you're doing in your life and everything you want to become and everything you want to be and everything you want to earn or keep. And think of what you hate and don't trust. And just think about it. Whoever you are, just think about what do you not know enough about that yet you have an emotional response to? What do you feel? Who do you feel is an honest and honorable person, and where do you feel like you are loyal to? Sport team or something like that, and then try to find out whether they've fucked something up for someone in a bad way. And Sandy Springs is suing Atlanta for cheaper water, and they're gonna get forced state mediation, and I bet they're hoping for it because the state hates large cities, and there's only one. It's this one, Atlanta. Probably not fans of Augusta either. There's a municipal league, and then there's a state senate. I mean, the municipals are probably all a little balkanized in their own sense. I don't know. But authority is arbitrary. We, as citizens, are accepting arbitrary authority that used to come with virtue, value, mythology that was, even then, horridly corrupt, hiding horrible lies, hiding these things. Now our own ignorance conceals it. So, try to find some little lies about your heroes and try to affirm your hatreds and your prejudices now. And then try to see if you should keep them. And then try to see if you need to lose them. I think things won't change as much as everyone thinks. The only thing we'll be left with is an idea that authority is bullshit. And we should reject more of it, more of the time. It changes the way we feel when we don't feel accountable to authorities. You feel liberated.